This lesson is Synchronous Programming Techniques in JavaScript. The objectives for this lesson are to explore an illustration of synchronous programming and understand how synchronous programming obstructs the UI thread. Code in JavaScript executes in a sequence, so everything is synchronous. One function must finish before another can start. So JavaScript is considered synchronous and single-threaded, so only one line of code can run at a time. This brings up a problem, is that long-running functions can block the UI from being used. So let's take a look at what it means for JavaScript to run synchronous. In this HTML page, if we look down here into the script tag, lines 19 through 33, the code starts at the top and it runs the first statement it finds, which is use strict, so it puts it into strict mode. Then the next line is console.log, starting a long-running operation. It then calls this function called fetch data, which you see here on lines 28 through 32. Now in here we're just doing a loop, but you can imagine that maybe there's some long-running operation that you might have going on in here. So this code runs, then once the code ends after line 32, it goes back up to line 26. So things just simply run in order. If we run this and we see in our browser then, so let's open up our console window in the browser, starting a long-running operation. There's our 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, ending the long operation. So you can see everything runs top to bottom. And we're going to explore this in more detail as we move throughout this module and show you how to change this from synchronous to asynchronous. Now, as I mentioned, the synchronous operations, because of the way JavaScript executes, they can actually block the UI thread. Let's take a look at this in practice. In this HTML page, within the main element, I've got some descriptions of what we're going to do. I then have a div with a button, type equals button, on click, call this function called block UI thread. Then I have an input field area. So I've got a label and an input. So what's going to happen? Well, let's go down here into the script tag and let's take a look. We're going to call this block UI thread, in which we're going to then, starting a long-running operation, call the fetch data again, and console.log, ending the long-running operation. Now look at the function fetch data down here on lines 42 through 46. What I'm doing in here is really simulating a long operation by doing a for loop that loops 200,000 times. And what I'm going to show you is that while that loop is going, we'll try to type into the input field that you see on line 29, and we'll see what happens. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to click on the block UI thread, and then I'm going to immediately come down here and start to try to type. And you see that little hesitation? It wasn't letting me do it. Now let's go back here to our VS Code. Let's change this to like 700,000. Let's save this. Let's go back to our browser. Let's refresh. I'm going to do block UI thread, and now I'm trying to type. I can't even get positioned in there. You saw how long that took. So that is an example of synchronous code that is blocking the UI thread. And this can happen, and it happens quite often. This is why we need asynchronous programming, which is what we're going to cover in the rest of this module. In this very first lesson, it was very small. We learned how JavaScript is synchronous, and we saw an example of synchronous code that blocks the UI thread. Like I said, the rest of this module, we're now going to start diving in how to make asynchronous calls with JavaScript. So coming up next, utilizing callbacks for asynchronous calls in JavaScript.